Yeah, my name is Steve Greenfield. I'm from New Paltz, New York. We're living there for almost 18 years, and I have previously served 2 terms on the New Paltz School District Board of Education. I have been serving for almost 15 years in the New Paltz Volunteer Fire Department, where I also represent them at the Ulster County Volunteer Fire Association in a legislative action capacity. And let me tell you a little bit about why I decided to run for this race, even though it's not traditionally expected that somebody in my position is going to win. First and foremost, I was really incensed when I saw the platforms of the major party candidates that were running, and the words war and peace and poverty did not appear anywhere on any of those platforms, and still do not appear even right here on this podium today, that we're talking about middle-class people, working people. We have 44 million Americans in this country living below the poverty line, another 50 million living just at it, and nobody is speaking to them. Nobody is speaking to the question of wages, which have not grown relative to inflation in the last 40 years and contracted to 1/3 of the part of GDP that they were 40 years ago. I majored in economics in college. I think we have enough corporate lawyers in Congress and in all the halls of government today, and I think people claim to vote on their pocketbook issues, and if that's really the case, then maybe voting for someone whose training is in economics is the way to go for at least 1 seat in Congress this year. We are not being serious about pretending we care about lowering taxes if we're not lowering the $1.5 trillion we're spending fighting wars. We're not serious about lowering crime and drug abuse and improving education unless we're lowering the rate of poverty, because the cost of not lowering them is much more expensive than the cost of addressing them. I also want to talk about climate change, because both parties are science deniers when it comes to the timeline that we have available to act. And most importantly, I'm kind of hard to believe that people come here to talk about people getting too much corporate money when they're here themselves on about $7 million of corporate money. So let's be serious about these things.
Diane Neal.
Thank you guys so much for.
Your opponents have frequently referred to you as being from outside the 19th House District, have criticized your campaign for busing in volunteers from New York City. What should voters know about your background and your ties to the district?
Yes, I so appreciate.
Stephen Greenfield, same question.
Very good. I moved here, January will be 18 years since I moved to New Paltz. I got involved by appointment of the town supervisor rather early on, living here in public affairs, when I was asked to serve on a new startup they were doing to do research. It was called the Transportation and Land Use Committee. It was my introduction to public service in New Paltz. Shortly thereafter, I stepped forward to volunteer for the fire department, although I was 42 years old at the time. And found myself a good home there and learned to protect my community. I've been in the neighborhood of 3,000 fire calls since I joined the department. When you see those wildfires burning up in Minnewaska Park, that's due to the effects of climate change. I'm not just here to talk to you about what we need to do to prevent that. I'm up there on that mountain in the middle of that fire. That's where I've always been and where I'll continue to be. I got involved in public education, and I was asked to run for school board in New Paltz in 2008, which I did. I served 2 terms there. We made a lot of progress in the district. We were leaders in the state on the anti-testing movement. Did very active work in removing corrupt public officials from some positions in New Paltz. I continue to serve in these areas, and so I am here basically running as somebody who came here and didn't take the classic New York City position of just enjoying the lifestyle and the beautiful views, but got involved in community service very early on, have legislated for 6 years, protected the district for the school children that are there, and will continue to do so.
Thank you.
Question goes to Congressman Faso. Congressman, you have faced criticism in this campaign for voting for the American Health Care Act, which would have replaced the Affordable Care Act. What specifically is your vision for America's health care system? The same question now to Mr. Greenfield.
Thanks very much. You know, the lack of anybody in this race advocating for Medicare for all was one of the biggest drivers of why I decided to enter this race in the first place. I continue to be concerned that positions about this of other candidates are being misrepresented. Mr. Delgado most certainly does not support the Medicare for all system. He's supporting some kind of transitional system that would unfortunately be the most expensive of all possible options. The option that Mr. Faso discusses would also be an incredible increase in cost and also not serve nearly as many people. People talk about the ethics of making sure that full health care can be available to 100% of Americans, and of course Medicare for all is the only system that can assure that, and it's certainly worth supporting on that basis alone. But I like to talk about it in terms of dollars and cents. If you live in New York State, 15 to 20% of your property taxes right now is going to public employee health insurance on the private market, and both of their plans would continue that and continue to drive their costs up and challenge the 2% tax cap and force the firing of teachers. It would, if you're a producer, 20% of your product cost is made up by your health care costs for your employees, and that's why our products are not competitive on the global market anymore. The world has moved on. We need to insure everybody. We need to insure them at an affordable cost for our businesses and our property taxpayers alike, and we need to get started on that right away. No more delays. Single payer, Medicare for all.
Thank you. Right now I'm going to address Steve Greenfield with this third question. Your platform includes cutting $1.5 trillion in military spending and, quote, avoiding international hostilities. How would you practically accomplish either of these goals if elected?
Okay, first of all, I'm not proposing cutting $1.5 trillion. I have explained that $1.5 trillion is the actual size of our current military budget. And it's really important that we acknowledge that, because our discussion about military spending is drastically skewed by this $700 billion figure that people toss out. But that figure is only the Pentagon budget and does not include that our nuclear arsenal is under the Department of Energy, our international weapons transfers programs are in the Department of State, and that the legacy cost of operating at $200 billion a year is in the Veterans Administration, and that the entire Homeland Security Department is part of the defense budget. So we have a budget of $1.5 trillion. Okay, the majority of that budget is a capital budget and exists because of, you know, the bases we have in about 80 countries and the active war operations that we have going on in 3 major theaters and about a dozen more minor theaters. So the first thing that I would do to bring that under control is to just stop starting wars. Okay? We are not a peaceful nation. We start more wars than all other nations in the world combined. Our military budget is more than the next 8 largest military budgets combined, and 6 of those countries are our closest allies. Military spending is the most inflationary form of spending a government can enact, other than simply printing money and handing it out to people. And that, in turn, forces us to use inflationary suppressing interest rates and things like that. Sorry. So, yeah, we're going to stop starting wars.
Diane Neal. So our fourth question is also for me, and it goes to Diane Neal. You are best known as an actor at a time when there is some backlash against celebrity candidates in American politics. You and your opponent, Steve Greenfield, are viewed by some observers of this race as potential spoilers. What specifically makes you qualified to serve in Congress? To you. Great,
thank you. No, I fundamentally do not believe that Congress of the United States is an entry-level position. I appreciate the ability of bringing an outside perspective to something, but that's why I started at school board, and I served 2 terms there. I am not bipartisan, I am nonpartisan. That was the great success of school board activity, is that party affiliation had nothing to do with it. It wasn't even on the ballot. And so that's what I'd like to bring to Congress, but it's really not an entry-level position. You need some experience legislating, researching, speaking to other people, making compromises, and getting that legislation implemented. And so, you know, I've been involved in education issues at the federal level and many other issues, environmental issues, as well as having this experience, and I think that makes me qualified. I do want to speak very aggressively to this issue of spoiling, because it comes up all the time and I reject it utterly. First of all, the biggest group is not people who are not affiliated with any party. The biggest group is people who don't vote at all. People who don't vote at all in this district outnumber people who do, and either winning party by a 2-to-1 margin. I'm not running as a threat to any major party, but I am running as a threat to war, poverty, climate change, starvation wages, and high taxes. If anyone takes that as a threat to either of the major party candidates, then you need to bring that to those major party candidates and not to me. I'm here to run for Congress.
Thank you.
Our fifth question goes to Antonio Delgado. Anyone paying attention to this race knows that your former career as a hip-hop artist has come under scrutiny, especially in a series of controversial outside ads. Congressman Faso says it's fair game to ask you whether you stand by things you said in those songs. Do you? Steve Greenfield, same question. Do you believe Mr. Delgado's rap lyrics are relevant to today's election?
No, I do not, and I really wish that this question were more about whether both of their careers as corporate lawyers were relevant to this election, because I think that's really what we need to be talking about, because that's what each of them would bring to the halls of Congress if they get elected. I've been a musician all my life, and I guess I'm considered non-threatening enough as an electoral force in here that nobody's gone back to examine my recordings, nor do I think there would be any purpose for doing that. But I invite everybody to go do that, because it might actually help my career if that's what we're going to be bringing into the political arena. You know, when I mentioned to my union officers, I'm a union officer myself, and when I mentioned to some higher-ups in my union that one of my opponents worked for Aiken Gump in New York, they gasped. You know, they gasped about the implications of that for labor union people. And I think that's the kind of question we need to be asking Antonio Delgado about. I think we need to be asking Congressman Faso about the corporations that he lobbied for during his lobbying career. But most of all, what's troubling me is this mail I get every day that I can't believe in my mailbox that shows blue-eyed and blonde women clutching their blonde children in dread fear of a black man who's come to their community. A Rhodes Scholar, a Harvard lawyer, and every day my mailbox is filled with things that my teenage daughters have to see about a scary black man who's a threat to blonde women, and I am incensed that my children had to be exposed to this, and I actually asked Congressman Faso to renounce these advertisements right here and right now on television.
I want to caution members of the audience about this. You gave us your word at the beginning that it would be at the beginning and the end. That's where it should stop. Please. This question goes to John Faso. During the debate over Brett Kavanaugh's Supreme Court nomination, you felt that Dr. Christine Blasey Ford had credibility, but you also said the allegations she made were uncorroborated and, quote, absent contrary proof that there should be no doubt, unquote, that Kavanaugh should be confirmed. Senate Democrats, however, who read the FBI report before the final vote, said it was anything but a comprehensive investigation. Do you stand by your public support for now Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, and if so, why?
Yes, I'm 57 years old, and I've watched a lot of Supreme Court confirmation hearings, and this was the greatest travesty of any of them, among many travesties that have happened in the past. And I have to bring fault to both of the major parties for what happened. First of all, it's important to remember that the allegations that Senator Feinstein had in her portfolio, she had for many, many months, and she waited until the very last second to present them. And the reason for that was that she wasn't simply trying to scuttle the Kavanaugh nomination. She was trying to scuttle it at a time when there wouldn't be time for President Trump to nominate a replacement while the current Senate was still sitting in office. And so she was not acting primarily out of concern for women, but primarily out of concern for blocking a nomination until after January. And I think that was reprehensible, because people are playing to their teams instead of playing to the interests of the American people, not to the women that might have been victimized and will continue to be victimized because of what happened during these confirmation hearings. But more importantly, it would always be very challenging to prove something that happened 36 years ago, especially when only the people in the room were the witnesses. I'm much more concerned that the vote went ahead and approved Justice Kavanaugh when he repeatedly lied under oath right now, this month, on television, in the hearing room, about things that he had written and was directly lying about his past and his vocabulary under oath. That should have been an immediate disqualifier. And I believe for the first time in history, we have a proven perjurer under oath now sitting in the highest court of the land. And I sure wish some more of the conversation had focused on that.
Thank you.
Our seventh question goes to Steve Greenfield. What, if any, changes to existing gun laws do you support?
Knew that was coming. You know, my favorite thing that would encompass changes to gun laws is if we would actually treat the Second Amendment the way the Second Amendment is written. I've already expressed how I feel about the explosive financially and physically military budget that we have. If we actually treated our country as a defensive country and actually treated the Second Amendment not only as it's literally written as a sentence, but as Federalist 29, which was written to explain it where it was laid out, then we would actually have none of the problems that a bloated military budget and a global military force creates for us, and we would have all the self-defense that we need. And so we wouldn't even have to have the argument about that. I believe in thinking in terms of public safety. That's the word I use. We have safety management legislation on all forms of consumer products that it's our legal right to own and operate in the interest of public safety. I don't think anybody that's interested in hunting or home defense needs to have a 70-round magazine. I'd be willing to see that dialed back so that the police could at least have an advantage in trying to take people down that are operating them. I don't think we need weapons of war in individual hands, and I think that that should be scaled back. And I think we need to really stop talking about improving mental health services and actually fund them, build them, and operate them so that people on the ground can do the kind of risk assessment that we do in all other safety situations.
And this is the eighth question, and we'll start with Diane Neal. It is multifaceted, but the same topic. What is your position on immigration? Specifically, do you favor an extension of DACA, and do you favor a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants? Also just wanted to include, how would you handle the influx of immigrants that are moving toward the U.S. border now from Central America?
The caravan.
Yes, pardon me.
Thanks.
Steve,
boy, is this ever not a 90-second question, you know, because each component of it, let alone all of them put together. You know, of course, I support DACA. Of course, I support Path to Citizenship for the Dreamers. But it's too small and too short-sighted a discussion to allow to stand on its own. I think this conversation needs to be expanded to all of the immigrant workers that are working in this country, because they're all of equal value to this country and its economy. And if you don't think so, just ask any farmer, ask anybody who owns a restaurant, ask anybody who owns a landscaping company, ask anybody who owns a small contractor. When you get work done at your home, when you go buy food at a restaurant, when you go buy food at a supermarket, that food is being kept affordable to you and leaving you with disposable income for other uses, because immigrants are doing that work at incredibly low wages. Okay, as far as the reform that Congressman Faso is talking about, that farmers are hoping for, it includes a ridiculous clause, which is a 45-day period of returning people to their homes while they're in the middle of working. How is that, what does that do to protect our immigration? Everybody here, protect our border, send them back for 45 days, then bring them back again. Who's bearing the cost of that? Why are we doing it? If people are working here, let them have a permanent work visa, and let that permanent work visa be something that can be gradually converted into permanent resident green card status, and then from there into citizenship if they work productively, pay taxes, and live here long enough.
Thank you, Congressman.
The question goes to Antonio Delgado. Do you agree with the administration's decision to move the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem? Why or why not? Over to Steve Greenfield.
Let's see. You know, this is a question very near and dear to my heart. My wife is the child of 2 Israelis. I have family by marriage in Israel, and I'm raising my children, you know, within the faith, in a secular way, but within the faith, the Jewish American tradition. And so, you know, this question really matters to me. In fact, it matters to me more than ever as I watch people marching down the streets of my own country for the first time in my life, carrying torches and shouting about Jews, and literature that I find distributed in my own community about how Jews are behind every anti-American conspiracy. I'm 57 years old, and for the first time in my life, I have to treat the state of Israel as a place where I and my children may someday have to go. And that's the reason why it was established. That's the reason why it's going to continue to exist. But That having been said, on the question of moving the embassy to Jerusalem, I fundamentally oppose it. I fundamentally oppose the misconception in this country that this was done by Donald Trump, because for months before it was done, Chuck Schumer was in Israel pressuring Donald Trump to make this move. This move was brought about equally by both sides of the mainstream political spectrum, and I am against anything that's of deliberate inflammatory intent, and that's what this is. When the embassy was in Tel Aviv, it was 40 minutes away from the seat of Israeli government, and there was no issue in conducting government transactions from that position. This was a deliberately inflammatory act. I'm against war, the personal and financial cost of it, and it should be reversed.
Thank you.
And our 10th question goes to Congressman John Faso. On the heels of the GOP-led tax overhaul, which you voted against, the federal deficit is up 17% to $779 billion. That's according to the U.S. Treasury Department. The debt also is growing. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell blames the cost of Social Security and Medicare and says cuts may be in line. In your view, what should the future of Social Security and Medicare be?
Really one of the most aggravating questions that comes up in the discussion of public administration. I cannot believe that we're even talking about where we could get the money to stabilize the lives of millions of people who are living on under $23,000 a year when we have a $1.5 trillion annual military budget. You know, we would not have questions about what our tax structure and what our debt looks like if we were controlling the places where we spend it, where we don't need to be spending it, and where it causes harm to spend it. But more importantly, in terms of this specific question, most people don't know this. I wish I knew why, but another reason why you might want someone with economics training in Congress in just one seat of the 435, which is that the majority of the United States federal debt right now, the Treasury notes that are the form that takes, the majority of it is held by the Social Security system in a completely secure manner. The Social Security system is not under threat. That's where American debt is being held. It's not in China. It's not in Saudi Arabia, like the fearmongers would tell you. It's right here in the United States in our pension systems. And so those systems are safe, and what's happening right now is people are raising fear about Social Security that's not legitimately there because they don't want you looking at the places in the federal budget where trillions of your dollars are being wasted every year. I don't want anybody taking any money away and health care away from people who are living on $23,000 a year. Let's look at the people that are really wasting our funds.
Thank you. Diane Neal.
Question. Our next question goes to Steve Greenfield. Whom did you vote in the 2016 presidential election and why?
I voted for Jill Stein, and I voted for Jill Stein to register my preference for her policies because I had the good fortune to live in a state where the electoral vote was being determined by 1.5 million votes or more. I have no regrets about that decision. I wish we would abolish the Electoral College so that my vote could finally count.
Okay, and
it's now time for the closing statements, and in fairness, we'll go in the opposite order here and begin with 2 minutes for Diane Neal.
Thank you. Thank you again. Thanks for everyone for listening and being so
Hi, thanks to everybody for coming down. Thanks for the invitation. It was really great to be here, and we really need more of this, more voices in our democracy and not fewer. So thanks to WAMC for making this possible. I can't believe that I've been through a number of these debates already and we still haven't talked about the drug crisis. Because if we did, I would have had to tell you that none of the treatment modalities we currently use have a recovery rate that's distinguishable from spontaneous remission, and everything we're about to spend on it is going to be completely wasted. I can't believe that we didn't talk about wages, because the wages have remained stagnant in this country since 1973 relative to inflation, no matter which party is in office. And currently, compared to GDP, our wages are back where they were in the 1920s. And there's simply no way to operate a consumer economy with our wages going backwards like that. That is not growth. GDP is an irrelevant statistic to wage earners who are now earning what they got back in the 1920s. The stock market is an irrelevant statistic statistic to people who are now earning relative to GDP what they got into in the 1920s. And it's been a bipartisan effort to make this happen. I wish we talked a little more about poverty and what we need to do about it, because as I mentioned in my opening, if we're not talking about poverty, we're not talking about the cost of poverty, we're not talking about the cost of crime, we're not talking about the cost of education, and more importantly, the cost of lack of education, the crime problem, the expense we pay for it, the prison overcrowding crisis, mass incarceration of people in color, and all coming from communities that are impoverished. We really need to talk about these things because they are all obstacles that are in the way of achieving all the other things that we have been talking about. And all of these obstacles were raised and left unaddressed by both parties. So it's time to let one person into Congress. The other 434 will maintain the status quo for the people that are interested in that. I'll just be one vote. But it's time to get these conversations out onto the floor of Congress, out onto C-SPAN, where everyone can talk about it, where the news will cover it. Thank you very much.